Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again on the State of Freedom.
The State of Freedom is a listener-supported podcast. We're committed to pursuing the truth about policymaking, decisions, and situations in Louisiana and at the national level that stand to impact our freedoms.
Please become a monthly supporter of the State of Freedom at freedomstate.us as we continue to expand the voice of liberty across Louisiana and beyond.
Meet the world's first living, full-spectrum, certified organic CBDA hemp extract. Ness's hemp oil was extracted from seed to bottle without chemicals, solvents, or heavy metals, and it surpasses world-class standards for purity. This pure and powerful CBDA has been proven to reduce aches and pains, ease mental tension, and promote better sleep. To get yours today, visit the Shop Our Partners page at freedomstate.us. Welcome to the State of Freedom, everyone. Good morning. We are coming to you, we're coming to you from a place of being grounded in faith and in the Constitution. We're committed to giving voice to the truth, living with courage, and taking action. And it's Tuesday, October 18th. The year is flying away. It's 10 a.m. Central, and I'm Danielle Walker, joined by my good friend and co-host, the watchdog in chief of Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, Chris Alexander. We are coming to you live on Voice of the People USA TV and radio network on Rumble, X, YouTube, and Facebook. And of course, you can always catch us the day after on our podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple. Well, joining us today is our friend Paul Hurd. He's a friend of the show, and he is our resident sage and redistricting guru. We'll be digging today into the New Orleans budget bailout and reforms at the state level that would return power to the legislature and make the legislature perhaps accountable to the people. What a novel idea. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Man, it's a good morning to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Indeed.
It is always a pleasure. Well, let me start out with the scripture of the day. Today is Galatians chapter 6, verses 7 through 8. And it says this: "Make no mistake about it, God will never be mocked, for what you plant will always be the very thing that you harvest. The harvest you reap reveals the seed that was planted. If you plant the corrupt seeds of self-life in this natural realm, you can expect to experience a harvest of corruption. If you plant the good seeds of spirit life, you will reap the beautiful fruits that grow from the everlasting life of the Spirit." And isn't it amazing that this truth is pretty universally acknowledged, that the way that you operate and how you treat others will come back to you, maybe not right away, but they will catch up to you sooner or later. And as we look at the unrest of the country and the state of our communities and our state, we can see that the seeds of self-life have produced a harvest of corruption to the detriment of the people. And those people, us, we could be instead reaping the fruit of a beautiful harvest. And it can be overwhelming to look at, but the Lord can turn it around. So today I have 3 prayer points for us based on this scripture. And I'll just walk us through them together, and y'all pray it along with me. Lord, first, I, along with my brothers and sisters, repent for any part we've had in sowing corrupt seeds in our own personal lives or in our communities, states, and nation by way of knowingly or unknowingly supporting corrupt candidates and leaders, or by our silence. Second, Lord, we ask you to bring the full measure of justice to those who have abused power and are causing us to reap these overwhelming harvests of corruption. And 3, Lord, we ask you to bring a cleansing along with this exposure we see, and to raise up righteous leaders who will be true Christ-like servants to the people.
Yeah, a cleansing catharsis, Danielle. You said during the prayer that, eventually things do come back around, whether we are planting good, fruitful seed or whether we are planting bad seed. And it looks as though, when you look at the city of New Orleans, that they've been planting some pretty bad seed over there.
Yeah.
And here to talk to us about it, as you said, is is Paul Hurd, the one and only, who really doesn't need an introduction. And Paul, thank you for joining us on the State of Freedom for a little while today.
It's great to be here on a very difficult and unfortunate subject.
Yeah, it is indeed. You know, Paul, you called a couple of weeks ago, you called for a statutory takeover of New Orleans by the state of Louisiana because of, to paraphrase Jefferson, a long train of abuses in fiscal mismanagement in the city of New Orleans. And it seems like if there was ever a situation that would call for it, it would be this situation that we're facing. But instead, the bond commission allowed the city to sell off, I guess, $125 million worth of bond to cover the shortfall. And the legislative fiscal auditor will have, I think, plenary supervisory authority over their fiscal affairs going forward. Is that at least part of what you wanted? And if it's deficient, how so?
Well, it is to some degree what we needed, but the legislative auditor does not have authority over their operation. The only authority that it has is over whether to release the funds that will be realized by the sale of the bonds. You sell the bonds to a bank, the bank buys them, they get 125 million, and they put it in an account in the name of New Orleans. And now New Orleans has their 125 million that they have no place on their budget to repay it, and it's to be used to pay salaries and the cost of the employees going forward. In other words, what they're doing is when they pay November's and December's salaries, they're going to pay them out of this fund. When they pay them out of this fund, what they're doing is these funds will be repaid by using next year's money, next year's property taxes. So what they're doing is they are moving the deficit, the $125 million deficit before they sold bonds. Now they're going to cover that with the bond money. They're moving that deficit into 2026. So 2026 will be in deficit. And the key to it becomes, are they going to change their ways on how they spend? The thing I can't figure on this is by doing it the way they're doing it and only paying salary, they're basically freeing up the money that New Orleans would have to pay for its salary, and the state's just paying it. Because what's going to happen is that bond, that debt is going to get moved into next year. The legislature's going to, this is the tripwire. They're going to go into the legislative session, regular legislative session. Cameron Henry from New Orleans is going to go get from state taxpayers $160 million and appropriate it to New Orleans to
What
pay
a
off.
disgrace.
Yes, to pay off last year's wasteful, abusive, unjustifiable spending. And that is the way this thing is destined to come down unless the state actually makes New Orleans say, we're not going to appropriate and pay off your fiscal embarrassment, your fiscal frivolity. They just simply threw an extra Mardi Gras party and spent $160 million. And that they did not have. They had 80 cents on the dollar. And so what this is all about today is how do we protect the Louisiana taxpayers from having to pick up the Mardi Gras party in New Orleans that they threw without any fiscal ability to pay.
So,
and
Paul,
that's where we are.
So what you're saying here is that even though technically and theoretically this is a loan that is supposed to be paid back by the city of New Orleans at some point, in reality, it's never going to happen there will be in a perpetual deficit. So this is really not solving the long-term problem, it doesn't sound like.
Oh, it's even worse. You're right, but it's worse than that. Here's where we are. They've got, if they just froze spending this year, they've spent $900 million. They only have $750 million in revenue. If everything stays the same, they're going to have another $150 million deficit in 2026. Now wait, and then you add on top of it a $125 million bond loan that we've made that they're supposed to pay, and the interest on that bond loan. So what we're looking at is basically New Orleans has to take last year's spending and cut it by 20% to get to zero. Now, they have to get below zero to pay the loan. You're talking about having to cut their budget in 1 year, 25%. They won't. They'll rebel.
So there's no authority, Paul. There's no authority in the current agreement or the current structure. I mean, I read yesterday that the state, Cameron Henry, is reserving the possibility for the state to go forward and do a complete statutory takeover of all the affairs in New Orleans, where they basically say, look, you can leave, municipal officials. We got this. We'll call you if we need you. That's not what occurred here. It looks as though they're going to be able to continue forward and I guess essentially do things the same way they've been doing them, but they will have, aren't there some constraints being imposed here by the legislative fiscal auditor?
Oh yeah, if they enforce them, but they're not going to enforce them. The answer, I'll say this thing came up. I wrote a public records request to the legislative auditor and said, give me the records that you're getting from New Orleans that will justify any draw on the money. They say, oh no, we don't have anything and we're not going to give you anything. Call the bond commission. I sent the same request to the bond commission and said, the legislative auditor has said that you're going to be the point person on the exchange of information required, again, like you said, to justify a draw, but that the bond commission is going to be the front person. Now, notice this, the bond person isn't analyzing anything. It comes in that door, it goes out the back door to the legislative auditor, all that's fine. But the legislative auditor in the conditions on the bond is the one who decides whether to fund. What I'm asking for is the public records that will show that the legislative auditor is making New Orleans abide by these restrictions.
Now he said, Paul, but now he said, he was quoted as saying that he is going to be on this like a microscope, and he's going back and he's going to do an audit from 2022 to 2025 and really tear this thing down, hide, hair, and guts. Is that not actually going to happen?
Two different things. He's going to do a looking backwards audit. That's fine. But funding the money is not conditioned on what he finds who wasted it.
Wow.
That is like a criminal forensic audit. Okay. Who messed up? Who spent money they didn't have?
But it doesn't bring the money back.
Well, not only that, it doesn't stop the money from being released.
Wow.
If they start paying salaries in New Orleans for November and for December, they can do that without doing anything. What it says they're supposed to do is they're supposed to be complying with building a balanced budget until we get to December 31, where their new year starts. There's really no hook to stop the money from flowing out. Then what they have to do is allegedly have a realistic balanced budget by January 1. What I asked for from the legislative auditor, and I've asked for from the bond, is you give us the public record that shows us that New Orleans has a balanced budget. And if they don't have a balanced budget, you can't give them the money now.
Yeah.
And what they have said so far, and I looked at my email before I came in, nothing. Nobody will produce any records. Look, I can do a balanced budget in New Orleans in 3 days. You take last year, y'all run a business. You take last year's revenue. You eliminate any extraordinary one-time revenue. Now you're down to reoccurring revenue. And then you see what percentage of it is it of your spending last year. And then you could, if you want to start, let's say it's 20%, it's 22% below what you spent last year. Take every expenditure that you made last year and budget it 22% less, and you're at balance. Now, you got to live with it. It's easy to write a number. It's hard to live with a number.
That's true.
So this is a dance. If they won't say, there's no reason why by December 1, New Orleans ought to have its first draft of a balanced budget for 2026. What I'm saying is there are they say guardrails, they say all these cute words. The answer is, if they start this thing, it can be used today to pay today's salary and thereby shift the salaries of 2025 into 2026, because they're going to fund the loan. How do you pay the loan? I'm going to pay it with 2026 property tax.
And so you're back in the same position.
Exactly. And you've got to get your balanced budget below balance to have any ability to have a reoccurring reduction of principal, reduction of interest, and
because you're already in the hole.
Because you've moved today's hole into next year, because you've used next year's income to pay this year's party.
And Paul, the people of the state, anyone who lives outside of New Orleans and anyone who lives inside of New Orleans should be outraged by this. Should be absolutely outraged. I want you to know that they just opened a new Tractor Supply in my community, and I will go and get a pitchfork and bring it to the legislature if I have to. I will absolutely do that, because why would they spend our money to rehabilitate a budget so that they can just continue to misuse and abuse taxpayer funds? That's absolutely insane. Where is the accountability for the people of the people who did this, and where's the accountability from the people of New Orleans as well?
And the worst part of it is the people of New Orleans are the ones that are ultimately going to be, in the businesses of New Orleans are going to be the ones that have to figure out how to pay for this party that they didn't participate in.
Yeah.
And right now, every legislator needs to be on notice that they don't approve a penny to fund the reduction of this loan through state money that they raised from the state taxpayers outside of New Orleans until the New Orleans fiscal apocalypse is fixed.
Paul, but they're saying, and not to interrupt you, but so it is said that the people who wanted this, they're saying that it is, a significant improvement, because as you mentioned a minute ago, there's a fund where the money has to sit. It can't be transferred without the written approval of the legislative auditor. Supposedly, there's going to be routine oversight over the process. He's supposedly going to have access to all the, financial systems there. And there's supposed to be, as I said, a forensic audit going back 2022 through 2025. And the state would retain authority to freeze money if they step out of line. You're saying that this is not only this is really not even a marginal improvement because it's really not going to get the job done.
This will not get the job done. Here's what we've got. Remember, this money, when you say oversee the process, that's not the condition of funding the money. The only condition to funding the money is whether or not the expenditures that they're requesting the money be used for this week or next week is payroll. It's the only requirement. Legitimate payroll. That's easy. It doesn't have anything to do with a balanced budget. It doesn't have anything to do with reduced spending today. It says, are these actual salary, and it says salary, benefits, compensation. I mean, we all know when we look at our stub, when we get our paycheck, all those little deductions and all that in healthcare and all that will be payable out of this money for their employees. So the state is picking up the cost of all the employees in New Orleans. For out of this money that then will be owed next year. So what they're doing is they're using this loan to access next year's money before next year.
Yeah. And no enforceable requirement, Paul, no enforceable requirement for a balanced budget, which would obviously entail the real streamlining of government. No enforceable mechanism for this.
Not until at least January 1. So they can, and remember this, why did this all of a sudden happen within a week? The reason it happened within a week is they did not even have enough money in the bank to pay their employees.
Wow.
They could not make payroll. Now, there's a couple of things, very small but important steps that did occur. Attorney General Murrell made it clear in the Fiscal Review Committee's meeting that there's no question that New Orleans right now is subject to being put under fiscal administration. No question. And nobody challenges that they are not woefully subject to being taken over. During the bond commission, the treasurer, John Fleming, made the same notation that, remember, we're doing this bond instead of exercising and our rights to put you into a fiscal administration, but only if you abide by these rules. And part of what they have to do, and this is why I asked legislative auditor and the bond commission, what information do you have today to show that they're going to do a balanced budget for next year? Because if we don't have that, this is pouring good money and after bad. That until we have some assurance that they're moving toward, look, it's no fun. They created some positions in New Orleans funded with federal dollars. The federal dollars are gone, and those programs cannot continue.
Yeah.
And the simple answer is, if you were in business, the decision today would be, do I cut back on my personnel and my services to get within my revenue, or we all go out of business?
That's right.
And right now, New Orleans is not fearful of going out of business as long as Cameron Henry is president of the Senate and Jeff Landry's governor.
Is that why there's no, Paul, is that why there's no requirement? Is it because of Landry and Henry that there is no explicit requirement that New Orleans balance its budget in this agreement?
That's why it's not in fiscal administration today.
Paul,
and that's going to be their legacy. Let me tell you, Jeff Landry can do a lot of good things on education. He can do a lot of good things on criminal. This is going to be his legislation, his legacy. If when he tries to get elected, somebody says, yeah, by the way, you gave $250 million to New Orleans for their party. He's a dead duck. And he doesn't need to be. This is like a child that won't behave. You don't give him another credit card. And the answer is, we got to fix the child because we love them. We want to fix it. But guys, there's no easy way to do this except to say, get your budget balanced. And if you don't, we're not going to give you a penny.
Yeah. Is there a role for Treasurer Fleming in this? Does he have an off switch to say, you know what, I just won't cut the check?
Not at this stage, not for the treasurer by himself.
Okay.
The Fiscal Review Committee is the legislative auditor, the attorney general, and the treasurer. But it takes all three unanimous votes before you go into fiscal administration.
Okay.
But those three could say you're not, and the conditions that they gave said if you're not in compliance, then we don't have to fund the money. It doesn't say that we're going to put you in fiscal administration, but the fact is, if they become in fiscal administration, they don't have to worry about funding the money because the auditor controls it directly at that point. But this thing's that's why what we need is a citizens group, maybe a legislative committee. I don't trust the legislators either because they're all scared of the governor and they're all scared of Cameron Henry as president. This thing may not have happened had Cameron Henry from New Orleans not been the president of the Senate.
Wow.
Had we had a president of the Senate from Alexandria, I'm just picking anywhere but New Orleans, I think the ability of New Orleans to simply say, forget that we've wasted $160 million. Let's just go, we'll fix it first. How often do you ever reward someone for a problem that they don't fix first? Yeah. And that's really where this thing is the loan fixed the cash flow. They can make payroll this week. Think about that. It's the next biggest city in the state now, couldn't make payroll. They didn't have cash in their checkbook to pay this 2 weeks worth of payroll. They had to get this loan and get it quick. And that means that money's coming out of that account quick.
Unbelievable. Reason they held off on the fiscal administration is because there's a new incoming mayor. And do you think she's going to bring any accountability to bear on this?
Well, I think that's her opportunity. That's her burden. Yes, I think to some had the mayor been reelected, the one that they had, and that administration been in effect, the idea that they would not be put in administration, to me, would be a political atomic bomb.
Yeah.
But because they have changed now, I'm not mad. I'm not distrustworthy of Mayor-elect Marino or the new council. But the answer is get the public. If you want the rest of this state to fund New Orleans and to fund you out of the Latoya, the destroyer's deficit, get us records that shows us that you're on the right track and let some public oversight occur. They're getting reports every 2 weeks and monthly on the payroll and on the balanced budget. And you ask anyone and they won't give you anything. I mean, it's like unless you sue them for a public records request, they won't give you anything. They won't give.
How is it that they're not, Paul? How is it that they're not? They're required by law to respond to a public records request, aren't they?
They're required not to deficit spend. What happened?
They do what they want.
You know, I was in banking, and banking has my first 10 years. I was in-house counsel at a bank, And my supervisor, I came in, I said, "Oh, you know what's happening? We're violating a regulation." He said, "Okay, what's the penalty?"
Yeah.
He said, "That doesn't sound too bad. Go fix it." But my point is, with New Orleans and their political immunity from punishment, what's the penalty? Oh, I'm sorry, we spent 160 million we didn't have, so the state gave us 125, and we found 40 million laying on the side that we had forgotten about. Unbelievable. That's the reason the loans for 125 and not the 160 that's the deficit. The total projected deficit for this year is 160 million. When this thing came up, New Orleans said, "Wait a minute, we got 40 million that some entity owes them. So we only need 125 million to cover payroll and the rest of the expenses for the rest of the year."
And they have had to know this is coming for a while, right?
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
There was a report in March from their chief administrative
Financial officer, yeah.
financial officer, chief administrative officer, that said, "Guys, by the way, this budget's not working." And it was an election year. Nobody squealed. Nobody, not a candidate that's an incumbent, not a new candidate that was a new candidate. Not one person squealed, because anyone who squealed was going to be voted against because they would be in favor of cutting the budget.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And so everybody, you had to try to get elected without promising to do the first thing you were going to need to do.
Yeah. Paul, wasn't there a projection 6 months or so ago by Cantrell's administrative officer that there would actually be a surplus, that they were anticipating reporting a surplus by the end of the year?
I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, I did. I read that where they were anticipating that they would have a surplus. And then we are 6 months later, 160. Do you have any idea? You said they found the 40 million that somebody owes them. Do you know where that money is actually coming from? That $40 million?
It's another governmental entity that's not fiscally underwater. So what they've got is one governmental entity is going to shift 40-something million to New Orleans because they owed it. It's like water or sewage, or maybe anyway, something like that.
Speaking of Paul, speaking of immunity from from punishment, the immune New Orleans
accountability, at least.
Accountability, yeah. You mentioned in your recent Hayride article the statute, the malfeasance statute, criminal malfeasance statute in Louisiana, which it looks, by looking at the statute, it's either the willful neglect of your public duty, or allowing your subordinates to neglect their public duty. It seems here that this looks like malfeasance that carries up to 10 years in prison. I'm assuming that we're not going to see any criminal action on any of this.
I don't know. I don't know how you can spend 160 million that you had no authority to spend and that you didn't have the money, and bankrupt an entity, and that not somehow be malfeasance under that statute. Now, you're exactly right. We know the DA won't prosecute carjacking in Orleans Parish. He's not going to prosecute malfeasance in office in City Hall. The Attorney General may have jurisdiction. The feds may have jurisdiction over federal money that rolled into New Orleans that was misspent. But as long if they misspent state money, it's between the prosecutor and the Attorney General, and that's a difficult situation, because our Louisiana Constitution gives the district attorney in each parish real strong unilateral authority on whether to prosecute or not prosecute. Now, if the money, we all have leverage. I guess if there's one thing that President Trump has taught us, it's that we can all, if we look around, find leverage. The question is the DA part of the spending problem, and therefore he could be handled by the Attorney General if he wanted to get in the pot with the misspenders? Or is he willing to prosecute in Orleans Parish this abomination of a fiscal mess?
I'm going to say big fat no.
Well, and that's the problem. What I want to do, what I want the Treasury to do, the legislative auditor, whomever, is to create an oversight committee besides them. The other question, and this is why, we need the records observable, reviewable outside of the legislative auditor's office.
Yes.
So that we, the taxpayers, can know whether or not New Orleans is being held to the legal standard in these conditions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if we don't get that, doesn't matter what they agreed to. Legislation comes in March and April. Give them $150 million out of our pocket instead of roads, instead of hospitals, instead of education. Just hand it over to the Mardi Gras crew. And look, I love Mardi Gras, but Mardi Gras pays for itself, not you and me. And so I really think this is this is going to define Jeff Landry's and Attorney General Murrow, because she's on the Fiscal Review Committee. And quite frankly, Treasurer Fleming, because they're the ones that if they don't handle this right and you come to the legislature and need $125 million for last year's waste, or $160 million because we didn't fix it soon enough, and so we had $125 million that we needed through 2025, but we didn't even get close to a balanced budget until June next year. So there's another 6 months worth of deficit spending as you're coming down if you're going to phase out and not cliff it.
Yeah.
How are you going to tell my senator from Washita that he ought to authorize that appropriation? You know why he's going to do it? Because the Cameron's the president of the Senate, and if you don't do it, you're not going to get your flood control project in Washita Parish or in Caddo or in Calcasieu.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Paul,
and so it's something that we, the public, need to see these numbers, because they're not going to comply. They're not going to comply, and we need to hold the funds, because if we let the funds go, each 2 weeks the money gets out and the people get paid, there's no motivation for New Orleans to do anything.
Exactly. And Paul, back to the point on criminal charges, I was having a conversation with one of my very first bosses in Washington, Horace Cooper, and he was like, why are the feds bringing charges against Mayor Cantrell? She defrauded the city over $70,000, as you know, for personal activities with her boyfriend / bodyguard. He wanted to know, why wasn't Liz bringing state charges of malfeasance against Cantrell? I mean, and we saw last week, for instance, that she brought charges against the former Speaker of the House, Clay Shakespeare. So is it? I know that in one sense, they charged LaToya for wire fraud. So I guess maybe the feds could, like you said, come after whoever else is responsible for this on charges like that. But is there any reason you can see that the state wouldn't have already brought charges against LaToya?
I think the problem may be, and you bring up a good point. What I would suggest is that theft charge against Scheck-Snyder occurred at the Capitol. I think that's where that big thing, that big Cypress monument was supposed to be, and disappeared. The DA that had jurisdiction to prosecute is the DA for East Baton Rouge Parish. If he referred it up to the Attorney General, see, Jason Williams in Orleans could refer all these malfeasances, voluntarily refer them up to Merle. All right, then Merle can bring them.
Okay.
That may be what happened in East Baton Rouge, is that the DA agreed to refer them to the AG, claim a conflict, refer it up. I wish the district attorney for Orleans would be asked, will you refer all malfeasance claims up to the Attorney General?
Yeah.
And he won't, but at least make him say, no, I won't.
So at that, so you're saying that even though it doesn't look as though the Attorney General has really brought any pressure to bear on Jason Williams to either prosecute on state criminal charges, Cantrell, or refer the malfeasance charges up here, you're saying that she doesn't have any original jurisdiction over that. So unless he acts, she doesn't have the authority to initiate criminal charges against
I don't believe, not for the crimes that occur in Orleans Parish. The DA,
yeah, right.
When Edwin Edwards and they were doing the Constitution that Louisiana has now, they made very sure that each DA's jurisdiction could not be preempted by the Attorney General without the cooperation of the local DA. So if he same reason he doesn't have to prosecute carjacking. If he wanted to refer a carjacking up to the Attorney General, he could. But as long as he doesn't refer them, he has jurisdictions constitutionally, unless you could prove that he had something to do with the malfeasance.
Which would create a conflict, and which would then require it to be him to recuse and to send it to the Attorney General's office. But so what you're saying, Paul, is as far as state criminal charges, there is really no movement on that, either from the DA's office or any public pressure brought to bear by the Attorney General to bring state charges against Cantrell.
Well, and what we've got to wait on that is, we know the result is 160 million overspent. We've got to wait on the forensic audit by the Louisiana Legislative Auditor, and then see whether or not we discover the details of where that money went. Because there's two different crimes that can occur, or two different levels. One is the intentional spending of money you don't have by the governmental officers. All right, that's malfeasance in office. Then you've got the issue of whether or not it was spent in a way to favor the recipient, and that's just corruption. That's just that's just intentional bribery and corruption of contractors. Now, I'm not saying that I know any of that occurred, but I think there's gambling in New Orleans too. And I just think it's one of those things that the legislative auditor will get to it. The most important question is he's going back to 2022. So he's going to audit 2022, 23, 24, and 25. What you've got to watch for, and we've heard this on the federal level, got to watch for prescription of the criminal charges, on whether and how quickly must they be brought. And so we need to get to these audits need to be done in a year, in 6 months, so that any accountability, criminal or civil, can be asserted without losing the right to recoup money that was misspent.
Yeah. So Paul, so your general position though is that under the state malfeasance law, intentionally refusing or failing to perform a required duty or performing a required duty in an unlawful manner or facilitating illegality by subordinates or people under you, you have strong suspicion that that has occurred on the part of the municipality in New Orleans. But we don't. So, but you don't think there's enough now to bring forward those charges just by what we know now. I mean, they drove their city into an absolute rut, and
Right.
with this.
Well, if you find a car at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, you know somebody did something wrong driving. You don't know how they got there.
Yeah.
The audit tells us how he took the wrong turn, how he intentionally decided he was through with life, and he drove all 17 people over the cliff. To get a criminal charge, you need the detail, and that's why the audit.
And that's important, yeah, because you bring criminal charges against individuals. You can't bring, I guess, criminal charges against a municipality. You've got to know who the individual actors were in order to be. Yeah.
The one thing that may be the best defense in New Orleans, and I'm being facetious here, is that they're going to plead ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
Golly gee, I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Malarkey. And I think the answer is they're responsible to know what they are doing and what they're entrusted with. And so what I'm more worried about right now, while the audit is going to get 90 days, 6 months, on the forensic backwards audit, what I'm worried about is I don't want a penny out of the fund to go out until we've got a semblance of a balanced budget for now and for all of 2026. And until we have that and the records that justify it, because this is a whole nother layer. Mm-hmm. And you've heard some of this. They budgeted last year $57,000 for overtime pay in the whole city. They spent over $500,000 in overtime pay.
Come on.
Budgeting is not just plug a number and then ignore it. Budgeting is put a number in there and live within it, and the number needs to be accurate. And the other number one problem, we need the records to justify the first expenditure. If we don't have records that justify the first expenditure, we're setting no standard for the next and the next.
Yeah, that makes sense. So basically, Paul, the nutshell here is that what we're doing here, we're going forward and we're putting a Band-Aid on an immediate, very massive short-term problem with no assurance that anything is being done to make sure that the problem does not recur in the future. In other words, no guarantee of a balanced budget. So there's no guarantee that we're not going to be, in all likelihood, we're going to be in the same position
see you in November 2026.
Yeah.
Now, my analogy would simply be, if I had a patient who was bleeding to death and I put 120 pints of blood in his arm but didn't fix the wound, he's still going to bleed to death.
Great analogy.
What we've got to do is fix the bleeding, the fiscal bleeding of New Orleans. And until we do it, this $125 million is a waste. The only person left to pick it up is the state of Louisiana. And that's what's right now, unless there's immediate adjustment of spending. We just sold a bond that the state is going to voluntarily pay for in March and April. Whenever the legislative session meets, they're just going to appropriate a special fund to pay it. That's all. I mean, they're just going to, and there's nothing wrong with that if it was New Orleans' money. The problem is they're going to take our sales tax or our other income tax that all of us throughout the state pay. And I love New Orleans. I don't mind helping, but I'm not going to give them a pint of blood while they bleed out anyway. And so what we need is New Orleans to fix itself for tomorrow, and the state may very well have to help it fix itself from LaToya. But
and
right
and
now,
there's no
I don't
and
want the
Paul,
worst.
yeah, and there's no way, just to round that out, there's no way for ordinary citizens to be able to determine 100% what is going on inside the government of New Orleans, how the money is being spent, how it has been spent, because they're not responding to public records requests. So basically, we'll be relying on the report of the legislative fiscal auditor, who is himself a government official.
Right. And who is reports to the president of the Senate.
Wow,
Yes.
look at that little circle. Isn't
Right.
that nice?
But Paul Hurd doesn't have a right to look directly at the guts of these records and figure out what's going on. Yeah, I think it's unfortunate.
Well,
You do have
I
a
don't
right,
think
but it's
that.
not.
I think what they're doing is simply daring someone to sue them for the public records, and it's just a stall. And I'm hoping that after they've refused and the word's gotten out that there's no public oversight. That's the key to this. There is none. The bond commission's not going to review the information. They're going to receive and pass to the legislative auditor, and the legislative auditor isn't giving out any information. So he can say at the end, trust me. And
that's it. And that's it. And that's the point. So
now,
we have essentially, to the extent that the government is watching over the government, it really is, in a sense, the fox guarding the hen house here.
They owe us accountability with and through transparency.
Amen.
And that's what we've got now is they've hidden the problem by saying, "Oh, we're going to make sure you comply next year." That gets us nowhere, because this money is only being supervised over it being employee compensation.
Right.
Other than that, the budget can be and is written as an additional requirement, but the timing's different. The money needs to be funded in November and December, and the budget doesn't even have to be balanced till January 1. And then we don't even have a chance to know whether it's realistic. Can they stay within it? Will they stay within it until January or February or March? And guess where all the fund money's already gone at that point. Yeah. And that's why I'm saying it's the timing. This was simply a cash flow with almost no restraint, because they'll use it up on employee before March.
Well, and Paul, cover your ears, but I would say that anyone watching who has some anger, some interest in those public records requests might ought to think about suing, and they might ought to think about a good attorney that we know.
You better believe it. Absolutely.
I'm hoping that when the Attorney General hears and the Treasurer hears that
they're calling already.
Yeah.
You already got the call, Paul.
that when they hear that they've said no, they need to set up a mechanism, a website, if they will, where the records that they're relying on just go to the website so that we can see them.
Yeah.
And so we can know when the legislative auditor decides, this is what I received. All right, we'll know what that is. And I'm the legislative auditor, and this is what I find to be true and sufficient to justify funding. We've got everybody contemporaneously on the record and looking at the same information.
Exactly. So, but in the situation, in other words, what you're describing, Paul, is that you have Mike Wagasback looking at voluminous records of spending by the city of New Orleans. He comes to his conclusions about where the money went, how it was spent, what, and you would have the exact same records, and you would be in a position to either agree, or any other citizen to either agree with his conclusions or to challenge his conclusions based upon the same records. But we don't, in a government that's supposed to be of, by, and for the people, we don't have that access.
Look, I even created, remember this, another way to cover this is to do it with so much information, you can't dig out the critical information or the cumulative budgetary information. It took me an hour. I built a spreadsheet and sent it to both of these people and said, look, based on the existing software and reports that New Orleans has, and each account's got a number, so you know what number it is in the budget system, in a computerized system. I said, here's the summary of what we need to know about compensation, about expenditures for each department. And part of the rules in the bond is that the budgeting has to be by department and it has to be realistic. So I just broke down a summary and said, all you got to do is take your detailed income statement, expenses, and income, revenue, and summarize it, because what I don't want to happen is police get cut and cultural development and libraries get increased or not cut. What we need is priority budgeting, and it wasn't hard to do. And this special report could be written off as a special report off their existing system instantly. And that's what we need for the public to know, that our money's not going down, being washed down the river.
Yeah.
So even if there is, Paul, so let's just say, even if there is, a balanced budget, even if they do come to a point where they're no longer deficit spending, the people still have a right to know where the money is going and how it's being prioritized, right?
Oh, well, once they digest, as opposed to us bailing them out, if they can digest the 125 million inside their revenue, because that means, think about it, each 100 million is about 10% of their revenue. They've got to cut 20% to get to zero. And then they've got to cut another 10% if they want to pay that loan off in 1 year. Even if they cut it by 2% to cover the bond will take 10 years to pay out, or 5 years to pay out. What I'm saying is it can be amortized at some reasonable level, but that still means that last year's expenditures need to be reduced on the budget and maintained at 22% less. Man, that's hard to do, but we need to, if you've got to walk across the Sahara Desert, the best time to get started is today, because it's a long trip.
Amen.
And so anyway, I'm hoping that this helps the governor, the attorney general, get a public disclosure information portal, get us the information that helps us easily see that they are complying or not complying with their requirement to balance a real budget and to only fund payroll for a certain period of time.
Paul, are there any constraints, legislative constraints on the state level? I know, we're talking about the municipality of New Orleans now, but it's I kind of shudder to think about the fact that the state would be the one supervising fiscal stewardship of anybody's money in light of the condition of our own, of the state now, fiscally. How would you compare the situation in New Orleans to the state as a whole?
Well, I'm gonna say this. I've got I think a similar issue, and that is my understanding of the profession and the practice of being an auditor is that one of the primary principles is the auditor cannot have any responsibility over the function that he's auditing. Otherwise, he's auditing himself.
Yeah.
We've put the legislative auditor on the verge of running New Orleans and then saying, I'm going to audit what I did. And it's not fair. It's not appropriate. The way a fiscal administration works is the legislative auditor would remain the legislative auditor, and the court would appoint a third party, if you will, accountant administrator with a staff that would oversee the operation of New Orleans.
Yeah.
But I even think another problem is just what we're seeing, and that is this is going to force the auditor, who is supposed to be a disinterested third party, it's going to force him making business decisions in New Orleans, and it's going to make it real easy for him to say, well, if we cut it by 22%, we can't do it. But how about 18? And all that gets done, and then the auditor decides 18 is good enough because he was in on the decision. He doesn't need to be in on the decision. He needs to be reviewing their decisions, and we need some outside citizen legislator group reviewing the data that's coming in, because we know what's coming down the pike, and that's going to be a request for 160. Here's what I'm going to tell you. It's going to be a request for, because they said two things at these hearings that I haven't mentioned. One, they said, oh, this is going to take 3 years to get through this deficit spending. That tells me that somebody is thinking they're going to give New Orleans the right for 3 years to deficit spend. And not only are we going to have our 125 this year, but we're going to have 60 million next year, and then the next year 25 million, and finally we'll be nowhere. We'll be right back where we are, and we're going to have to make them say, I'm sorry, but there's no manna from heaven this year. Balance your budget, because all the rest of us live in a material world where you can't spend more than you take in. Not only that, their financial stability requires that they have 1 year of operating cost in their reserve to be deemed a stable municipality. And they've drawn that down to, remember, their operating costs are 900 million. That accounts down to 45 million. It's 5% of what it needs to be.
Wow.
And they're going to use part of that money to fund this month's operating expenses, plus the 125 to cover the employee expenses, to try to get to the 160 million
Right
at the end of the year. And they're still digging a hole.
They get an F in basic math from me, Paul.
Oh, no. Well, I'm going to say, I agree with what you're saying, except for one thing. They know what they got is the sugar daddy at the end of the legislative session. Their answer is, I promise I won't go to any more parties, and I won't do anything else outrageous. I won't travel to France and everywhere else on the way out the door if you'll just give me $160 million. I mean, it's just embarrassing.
And Paul, on the legislative auditor, would it be more appropriate for that person not to be reporting to the speaker of the president of the Senate? I mean, is that the same situation as the inspector generals reporting to the secretaries of the departments at the federal level?
There's nothing you can do about it. That's what the legislative auditor does. That's his statutory boss. That's why you're hitting on the right. That's why you can't escape, and you need a third party so that he remains the auditor, not the participant.
Exactly. But as long as there are, a mix of people in, elected officials who are not reform minded, and the politics involved of the way this accountability structure is set up, with, as Danielle said, with the fiscal auditor being answerable to, the Senate president. Paul, your point about the third party, a true third party independent forensic citizen auditor who knows what they're doing, or a group of people, is the only way to get this done. It's just too incestuous politically. And, we've seen so much in this state where they try to appear as though they're doing something. They want the perception and the projection of reform to be out there, but they don't want to do what's really necessary to achieve meaningful reform. And I think that really is the nucleus of your criticism of all of this.
Right. That's exactly right. And the answer is, this is nowhere near as strong as a fiscal administrator would be, because the fiscal administrator simply can say no and not have to ask anybody. What we're doing now is backing off and saying, we're going to give you $125 million to make your payroll that you can't make. And we're going to give you 60 days to come up with some sort of budget, but nothing is required on the fix tomorrow is not a condition of funding today. And so again, the state's $125 million will be out the door without any accountability and without any assurance that the same song, second verse, will be sung next year in March and April and May.
Yeah, definitely. Now, Paul, before we let you go, one question on congressional redistricting.
Sure.
What do you think is going to happen with California? We've seen a lot of fireworks over there about their redistricting plans.
They're interesting in the sense that I think, see, they're going to, what we've gotten into is the Supreme Court ruled that the federal courts have no jurisdiction to question the state's construction of election districts if it's constructed based upon partisan favoritism. You have the right to do that at the state level, and the only person that is accountable is your state legislator. The answer is, I think they can do just like Texas, and you're going to end up with some ugly districts. I think, look, I've been looking at this for 30 years. I think there is a way to have a statute or in the state constitution, a provision that protects voters and not parties and not politicians. And I've got to go through parties and politicians to get it enacted. So it isn't going to happen anytime soon. Between now and the 2026 elections, you're going to have partisan gerrymandering in Texas, in California, in Indiana. Interestingly, in Louisiana, depending on how our case comes out, we could end up with 6 Republicans instead of 5 and 1. Because if you want to cook the districts, what's interesting is you could very well end up with every district being majority Republican, but it's going to be competitive. And that's where the incumbent desire to say, okay, give them one just make mine where it's not competitive.
Well, exactly. Just make one of them. Just make one unconstitutional. Okay, we'll just reduce it by half.
Well, you don't even. I'm gonna say this: even District 2, as drawn up in the plan that's under scrutiny, is a racial gerrymander.
That's what I mean. So,
I know,
so yeah.
But it can be cleaned up in the sense of whole parishes and still be majority Democrat. But and that's why. So that the Democrats are there and they don't get too many of them in Scalise's district, don't get too many of them in the Baton Rouge district. And so that's what's going on, is how much do those incumbents and the politicians supporting those incumbents, how much do they want and be willing to have a competitive district? But the best case scenario would be that you would end up with a 6 Republican, 0 Democrats. You could end up with 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans if a couple of the competitive ones barely went the other way. Now, the desire for safe electoral districts, period, is a fundamental driving force of all districting. And so as it relates to what's going to go on between now and the 26th, you're going to have a state by state battle over the desire for safe political districts versus competitive political districts. And that'll really tell you how much gets gerrymandered with what we say in the sense of it being bizarre districts that has a little of this, a little of that, come in here, go out there. I've always liked one of the terms that we invented was duck contiguity. Districts have to be contiguous. But if you take some of New Orleans and you hook it to St. Tammany, the only way it's hooked is that a duck can fly from New Orleans across Lake Pontchartrain to St. Tammany. And you get it there, you get it down in Plaquemine, you get a little duck contiguity. It's ugly to everybody but a duck.
Well, Paul, thank you for taking the time to be with us and shedding some light on this subject. It just means an awful lot and very informative to our listeners. And knowledge is power, and you always bring it. So thank you for being so generous with your time.
Glad to be included. Glad to participate. Thank you.
We love you, Paul, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you. Chris, Paul Hurd is always a champion. You can always trust him to bring the fire. I mean, I knew that he was watching New Orleans like a hawk, but I had no idea. I mean, and I knew it was bad, but I didn't know how bad this deal was. I mean, when we were talking before the show, the articles make it seem like it's just daisies.
Well, it makes it seem like, there's going to be accountability, and really there's not going to be accountability because, first of all, no matter what the legislative fiscal auditor finds, even if it's all 100% accurate and he finds this long train of abuses, there's no guarantee that anybody is going to do anything about it. And the second problem is that, as Paul said, we are beholden to what he says, because we, the citizens, are not allowed to see the actual records from which he's deriving his conclusions. It's interesting that Paul Hurd can make a public records request and may end up having to sue over it. And if he sues, he's probably going to get a judge in New Orleans, I would assume, since that's the domicile of that municipality. And who knows what a judge is going to do. And then you end up at the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court. So there's really no ultimate guarantee of transparency in our government right now. And that is what is really sad about this.
Well, Chris, since you said that, I'll say, since there's no guarantee that there will be transparency, there's a 100% guarantee that there will not be transparency, because that is what we have come to learn by experience.
Exactly. Since there is no guarantee of transparency that is enforceable with consequences, we can rest assured that there will be no transparency. You're exactly right, Danielle. And and Paul predicts that we are going to be, or New Orleans is going to be, in exactly the same position at this time next year as they're in now. So, they should have gone with the statutory takeover, where the state completely takes over the operations of the municipality that's insolvent, and the law provides for that. But that's not what they did. It looks like they did a sort of some patchwork here, a temporary band-aid, and the band-aid itself is got blood pouring through it. So I don't
And
know.
And you know what's interesting to me, Chris, is that if you were the incoming mayor of a city that was completely insolvent, you're going into a meeting with the state to try and figure a way forward. Wouldn't you want the oversight to protect yourself? Right? This is a very delicate time. I would want the oversight for maximum transparency if I intended to do the right thing and try and right the ship. I think that if Mayor elect Moreno wants to right New Orleans, you would think that she would say, "State, come here. Let's open the books, open kimono. Let's figure this thing out together. I'm happy to take direction because I don't want this falling in my lap."
Danielle, they call you brilliant for a reason. And that is an absolutely brilliant point. If this new mayor was politically astute, she would go in there and do exactly what you're saying, because it would do two things. It would take the pressure off of her,
Yeah.
and to do this, or she would work with him, but it would also emphasize to the public that all of this pre-existed my tenure. I'm
That's
not
right.
responsible for this.
Yes.
But if she had been smart, she would have done that. But that's not what's occurring. And so what's going to occur now is, I know the people know she was just elected, but there's going to come a point in time, and it may be 8 months from now, it may be a year, it may be 18 months, maybe to whenever it is, when she's going to wake up one day and it has all become her problem, whether it's legitimately her problem or not, and whether she's fighting tooth and nail to try to do something about it, it will become her Achilles heel at some point. And she
Yeah.
could have avoided that if she had encouraged or even insisted upon Paul's plan of resolving this. So I think it's not going to bode well for her going forward.
No. And a couple points, Chris. I think we do need to do some calls to action on this because it's going to impact our personal pocketbooks. So perhaps we need one to Senate President Henry demanding the release of the records by the legislative auditor. And two, um, we need to go to the entire Senate or whoever it is. If it's the Senate that makes the decision on this, I'm not sure. It may be the whole legislature, and say, do not give New Orleans one red cent.
Yeah, and I think there still is time to do that. I think there's time to do that, because if you agree with Paul, and we do, right now they're they're doing exactly, really functionally, what we were trying to avoid. They're
Yeah.
giving New Orleans money to solve an immediate, urgent problem, while imposing no real accountability on requiring them to fix it going forward. That's what we're dealing with here. And to add insult to injury, Danielle, it's amazing that we live in a state where they're just, state agencies can just violate public records requests by citizens, and then force the citizen to go file expensive and protracted lawsuits in order to get records that the government refuses to provide. I think that is truly unfortunate in our state.
It's disgusting, and it shows the absolute disdain for the public and that absolute lack of accountability, lack of submission to their actual role, which is to serve the public. How many public records requests, Chris? You've made a lot of them over the course of even just LACAG being in existence. How many public records requests have been answered with even an acknowledgement of receipt?
Oh, I would say they've all acknowledged receipt, and generally we receive some portion of records,
In a timely manner?
uh, not really, but usually we end up getting them. But the only time that we've received everything to which we've been entitled was a couple of times that we had to file suit. And I don't believe that that's the way it should work in a government that, that is built theoretically upon transparency.
Yeah.
I mean, Paul Hurd has been practicing law in the state of Louisiana for 30 years. I mean, he's brilliant. He's a seasoned constitutional lawyer. He has a background in banking. And yet, right now, he doesn't have access to the same records the legislative fiscal auditor has access to in coming to the conclusions that he's going to come to regarding what's going on in New Orleans. I
Yeah.
mean, so we have to rely on a government official to tell us what another government agency is doing and how they're spending our money with
Yeah.
no way to check it.
No. And you know, this is perhaps an idea, Chris, because as we were preparing for the show, we were talking about, well, is there some way for the city of New Orleans to do a transparency measure like Treasurer Fleming has instituted with his school initiative, where all the books of the schools are opened up for the public to see how they're being spent, how are they being managed, are there over expenditures, are there unexplained deficits, and the people can see if these entities that are being paid for by their tax dollars are being properly managed. Well, this is what I think should happen, Chris. I think we should all challenge our parish presidents to start a transparency measure. If you want to protect us against future potential parish presidents and parish councils, police juries that are not fiscally responsible, go ahead and institute a transparency measure now, so the people have complete access, and any future elected officials can't back out of it. Why don't they all just start their own transparency measures, put all the books online?
I think that's a great idea. So everybody should just follow Treasurer Fleming's example on this.
Yeah.
The personal example of his office, which
And
is real transparency.
Yeah, and I would argue that perhaps Treasurer Fleming could help them with a bulk discount if they went in as a group.
Exactly. Yeah. Create a little incentive here,
Yeah.
Danielle. But yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I think we'll have to pitch that. But your idea on the calls to action, is very, very important here, and I think we're gonna move forward and get a call to action up on this.
Excellent. So people should just keep watch on Facebook and Twitter for those calls to action over the next couple of days. And also, I have a couple of announcements, Chris. Tomorrow on For the Love of Freedom, Sean Briscom will be back to talk about year-end tax strategies. And on Thursday, we've got Steve Jarvis joining us. He will be giving us an update on the MAHA agenda and the ongoing crisis to farming and human health caused by geoengineering and weather modification. So y'all will want to tune in for both of those. We'll be back with you at 10 a.m. Central on both days.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward, Danielle, to talking to Steve about his view of Susie Wiles, because several people have said that Trump's chief of staff is the one who is blockading real MAHA reform. I've
Yeah.
heard it from more than one person, and Steve may have some insight into that. But yeah, he's a great guest and always very informative. So I'm looking forward to that. I
Yeah.
also want to encourage everybody, Danielle, to continue to subscribe and share the State of Freedom.
Yeah.
We have up, Danielle, and I've seen it because I've shared it. The different options with regard to advertising and supporting the State of Freedom. That was
That's right.
extremely well done. And so I'd encourage everyone to go to State of Freedom Facebook and find that and see whether you have a need that we can fill for you here at the State of Freedom, because we will absolutely enthusiastically help you build your business or whatever it is that you're doing, and we have a voice, believe me, that is resonating more and more and more across the state as people come to see, Danielle, what's really going on in our government. I don't think there's ever been a time in history, Danielle, where in Louisiana history, where a podcast like ours in our state has been more urgently needed, or that we're filling a more important niche than we're. And I say that with all humility. I just think it's hugely important what we're doing.
Yeah, it is. And it's also hugely important what you're doing, leading LCAG, Chris, Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, making sure that the legislators understand that people are aware of what's going on and people need to be heard. And you are the voice of the legislature very often. And people should support LCAG as well, lacag.org.
And there's Danielle, there's no way that's LCAG is doing it. And there's not a watchdog group in Louisiana that's doing it as comprehensively, as exhaustively, and as exhaustingly uh, as we are in the legislature.
Right.
Everything they do that affects Louisiana citizens, we know about it, we see it, and we make sure that the public knows about it. And I don't think there's any other group. And it's amazing how people sometimes construe the public disclosure of votes, individual votes on hugely important issues, as somehow attacking the legislators. That stuns me, that when LCAG very directly and truthfully and broadly reports how our legislators by name voted on hugely important issues, or how they killed a bill here that would have served Louisiana citizens, and we report that, how somehow we're attacking our public officials. Guess what? Nobody made you run for office. Nobody made you swear to the Constitution that you're going to serve and protect Louisiana citizens. Nobody made you go into office and yield and bow and bend the knee to big special interests. We're not doing anything other than reporting facts. We're not attacking your family, your background, anything. But we are going to unapologetically make sure that voters know exactly what their legislators are doing. And if we're going to be attacked for that, or accused of attacking for that, as far as I'm concerned, we are hovering right over the target.
Yeah, I agree with you, Chris. And on that point, I just want to make one other point that I neglected to make earlier, which is a real and I believe legitimate concern about Senate President Henry having such a heavy hand in this process, even if it's just a hand of influence. We saw, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but I'm pretty sure we saw this past legislative session him not move bills forward that needed to be moved forward.
Three bills, just die on the Senate floor. A very important DEI bill, a very important bill that would require someone who receives an ethics complaint in the state to know who's accusing them, and then a bill that would have categorically prohibited foreign donations to our campaigns and our candidates. Just die on the Senate floor.
And
in
don't
a
forget,
Republican-dominated Senate.
And don't forget that he also carried the water, I believe, for Senator Cassidy to try and fix the elections to work in his favor.
Absolutely. Cameron Henry is the one who tries to sneak this amendment onto a bill to eliminate the second Republican primary so Bill Cassidy can go back to the Senate on a plurality. This is a Republican Senate president doing these things. And this is the guy to whom the legislative fiscal auditor is answerable in terms of his reports and his conclusions and his scrutiny of the fiscal affairs in New Orleans. This is the guy to whom he's accountable. I mean,
I would hope that as a resident of New Orleans, President Henry would want New Orleans affairs to be fiscally in order. I would certainly hope that, but time will tell, I guess. I mean, I feel like if that were the case, we would have seen maybe some different outcomes in the recent meeting. I don't know, Chris.
Danielle, I don't know what, Paul said that, the three person fiscal agency or whatever that made the decision about whether, not to go forward with the complete takeover of New Orleans. It was, John Fleming, the legislative fiscal auditor, Wagasback, and then Liz Murrill, the AG. Yeah. And they have to be unanimous in order to to go forward with the statutory takeover. So I don't know. I would suspect that, Commissioner Fleming probably was leaning in the direction of a takeover. I know, I know how he is fiscally, but we really don't know. But at least one of them, and maybe two of them, and possibly all of them, declined to do that. But I think they should have gone forward with the statutory administrator that is provided for in Louisiana law. If there's ever a situation that requires it and demands it, it's the one in New Orleans. And they didn't do that. And I think it was probably a missed opportunity when they had a real big bat hanging over the city of New Orleans, a bat that they could have swung and used, and they did not. And it's unfortunate.
Well, perhaps they can pick it up at any time, but any time later is just going to cost us more money. So,
well, yeah, it's just going to cost us more money. Paul is right on this, Danielle. But as always, it's always fun being with you here, and a privilege to be able to get the word out. And I'm looking forward to Steve Jarvis. And as we always say, as I think about my hero, William F. Buckley Jr., inveighing, we shall go.
Yes, we shall. Thank you, Chris. See you soon.
Love you.
Love you. Bye. The secret to losing weight 2 times faster has gone viral. See the transformations hundreds of thousands of men, women, and teens are experiencing around the world with the Slender Eyes drops. These homeopathic hormone-balancing drops are proven to control appetite, support thyroid function, improve energy, boost mood, and increase metabolic rate. To learn more about the drops or other incredible natural wellness and lifestyle products, email me at danielle@freedomstate.us or visit the Shop Our Partners page at freedomstate.us. Hey, Danielle Walker here. I'd love for you to check out my online boutique, Lux Lion. My mission for Lux Lion is to showcase innovative African designers and sustainable, mission-driven brands. To do that, I bring you stunningly beautiful handcrafted jewelry and accessories from some of my absolute favorite places on earth. Small batch wholesale for storefronts is also available. Join me in celebrating African artistry and shop now at luxlion.us. Use promo code FREEDOM for an additional 10% off your purchase. Thanks for joining us today on the State of Freedom. Be sure and check out the show notes for this episode. You can always go there and find the calls to action and resources mentioned in the show, and you can find out more information about our advertisers there as well. If you want to learn more about us or support our work, visit freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org. We'll see you next time. God bless.